on Tuesday with writing a hypothesis. So we make an observation, ask a question, form a hypothesis. That's where we're at, right? And we talked a little bit about research in there because that's not part of our song. So this is a cheat sheet. So I gave you the cheat sheet folders, I believe, on Tuesday. So this is going to be the first thing that you're going to put in that folder. So the reason that we have these separate, and you have that separate folder that's clipped into your binder, is because throughout the whole year we're going to be using different hypotheses. And so at times you're going to have to choose, is this a well-written one? Is this a not well-written one? Maybe like fill in your prediction on something. And so, you know, you might need a quick refresher. So you don't have to flip all the way back through a set of notes. You can just go to that cheat sheet folder, get that cheat sheet out for hypothesis writing. So it's worked out really good for like variables, graphing, hypotheses, different things like that that are continual themes that are used throughout our whole year in science. Okay, so I just want to go over this, but we know that there's a set format. We use the if-then format. So what we mean by that is the very first word you're ever going to use and always use for your hypothesis is the word if. So that's nice. That's right where you need to start. And so after the word if, this is where your situation is, right? So some little tiny description. You're not going to know all of the situation. You're not going to know all the experiment. You're not going to have all those details, but you're going to at least have some kind of idea of what is being tested. Next thing you have is the word then. So then, and after that follows your prediction, right? So you don't have to say, I think, or I believe. That is part of it. I'd use the example, if you say you're going out to dinner, you don't have to say that you're going to be eating food. That's expected, right? You're going to dinner, you're probably going to eat something. So, same thing with a hypothesis. You don't have to say, I think, or I predict. That is expected. That is the intention of a hypothesis. So, we don't say, I think, or I predict. Okay? So here's an example. Let me go to the don't evers again. So there's a couple things besides don't ever use I think and I predict. Also, don't write it as a question. This is a statement. It might be wrong. After you do the experiment, you might realize you had everything totally wrong, but that's okay. You still don't put it as a question. You say what you believe is going to happen in that statement, and you don't make it a question mark. Also, don't be wishy-washy. Don't be like, I think maybe sometimes, sorta, it's gonna be like this. Just bam, say it, okay? And don't just restate your original question. So remember, we said sometimes you start an experiment out by asking a question because you've made an observation, makes you ask a question or get curious about something. So don't just like spin it around and make that your hypothesis, right? The hypothesis has to be very specific in giving that little bit of a situation and then giving the prediction based on that situation. So here's an example. I observed that elves love candy canes. That leads me to ask the question, do elves like all candy or just candy canes? Right? So I decided to test this. So I've made an observation, I've asked a question, now it's time to form my hypothesis. So if I am writing a hypothesis, the very first word is going to be the word if. I also know that I have to have the word then in it, right? After my word if, I know I have to include a little description of a situation. So if I hire 20 elves to wrap my Christmas presents and I give them a choice of either being paid with candy canes or M&Ms, then, and here comes my prediction, the majority of the elves will choose to be paid with candy canes. All right? So I could be totally wrong. Maybe they hate candy canes because everybody thinks they like them and that's what they're always giving them. And so maybe they would love to be paid with M&Ms, but that's okay. My hypothesis is allowed to be wrong, right? As long as I have the correct format, as long as it's giving me some guidelines to help me kind of set my experiment up. Because remember, we said the hypothesis can kind of be like your keep you on track. You don't get off on a tangent or a wild Google search and end up like doing some experiment that wasn't even like what you had originally intended to figure out. Okay, But this would definitely answer my question, because my original question is, do elves like candy canes or all kinds of candy, right? And so the whole reason is to help me explain or answer that initial question. And the way I have this set up, if I set up an experiment to follow this, it should give me that information. Now, the other thing, a lot of times when you do an experiment, it just leads you to ask more questions. So maybe I get the results that most of them chose candy canes. Well, maybe M&Ms, maybe they don't like chocolate, or maybe that wasn't a good option. So maybe I do candy canes and Skittles, or candy canes and other types of candy. So just because I learned one thing, a lot of times that's not the end of it. It's like, okay, now what? Like, take it another step or do something else.